This mistake can destroy your transmission in a second, and many drivers don't even know they're doing it. If you have an automatic car, you probably think it's simple. Put the gear shifter in D and off you go. But the truth is that some seemingly harmless habits can destroy your engine, burn out your brakes, and lead to repair bills of thousands of dollars. Today I'm going to show you 12 mistakes you should never make in an automatic car. And number 11 is something almost every driver does without even realizing it. Let's get started. When you go down a slope with the gear shift in neutral N, the engine and wheels become disconnected, like two exes who don't want to have anything to do with each other anymore. The problem? The engine is no longer helping with engine braking, so all you have are the regular brakes. And guess what? On a long downhill, they can heat up faster than a pan left on the stove. If they overheat too much, they might eventually stop working altogether. And then, you rely on luck, or a strategically placed pothole to stop you. Now, some drivers believe that coasting saves fuel. Sounds logical, right? Well, surprise for modern cars, it's actually the opposite. If you leave the car in gear, the engine automatically stops fueling and just uses the movement of the wheels. But in neutral, the engine has to consume fuel just to keep running, meaning that instead of saving fuel, you're wasting it. But let's put in a dangerous scenario. You're in neutral and suddenly need to accelerate to avoid an accident. If you're in drive, you press the pedal and the car reacts immediately. But in neutral, you first have to shift into drive and then accelerate. That kind of delay can get your heart racing, and in the worst case, a visit to the service center. Your engine is full of metal parts that move incredibly fast. The problem? In the morning, when it's so cold outside, it freezes your thoughts. The oil in the engine becomes thicker and circulates more slowly. This means that when you start the car, the engine needs a few moments for the oil to reach all parts. If you hit the gas right away, the pistons and other metal components rub together without proper lubrication. And what happens when you rub metal on metal? Premature wear. And in the long term, big bills at the mechanic. Have you ever heard the classic advice, let the engine run for 10 minutes in winter? That may have been true for cars from your grandfather's generation, but today, it's just a myth. Modern engines warm up more efficiently while driving, not while idling and wasting fuel. What should you do? Simple, start the engine, wait 30 to 60 seconds and drive off, but without revving the engine like you're on a racetrack. This way, the oil is properly distributed, the engine reaches optimal temperature faster, and you're not wasting fuel. But let's see what happens if you take off immediately and really floor the gas pedal on a cold engine. The oil hasn't spread everywhere, so the parts wear out faster. The fuel doesn't burn efficiently, which means more carbon buildup in the engine. In an automatic car, the torque converter is like an overworked employee. It's always working, even when it shouldn't be. When you're stationary in drive with your foot on the brake, the torque converter is still trying to push the car forward, but the brakes are holding it still. The result? An unnecessary conflict between the car's systems. Imagine stretching an elastic to its maximum. If you stretch it for too long, it starts to weaken. The same thing happens with the torque converter. Overheating, premature wear, and over time, costly transmission failures. And aside from the stress on the transmission, let's talk about the real risks. If your foot slips off the brake, the car might lurch forward. In traffic, that could mean an unwanted kiss with the bumper of the car in front. And guess what? Your insurance won't really back you up. Then there's the fuel consumption issue. Even if the engine is idling, when you're in drive, you're using more fuel than if you were in neutral. And if you're stuck in traffic or waiting for minutes, the transmission might overheat more than necessary. And you know what comes next? Big repair bills. What should you do? If you're stationary for only a few seconds at a red light, keep the brake pressed, no problem. If you're waiting more than 60 seconds in heavy traffic parking, switch to neutral and use the handbrake. If you're parked for a longer period, put the car in Park P. The automatic gearbox is a precise mechanism with delicate parts that work together to provide smooth gear shifts. But if you have the habit of resting your hand on the shifter, even without pressing it hard, you're putting unnecessary pressure on it. The problem? The shifting mechanism is not designed to endure constant pressure. Even light pressure, sustained over time, can cause premature wear to the internal components of the transmission. Imagine pressing a fragile button continuously. At some point, it starts to give way. Besides the mechanical wear, there's another risk if you shift gears and, without realizing it, leave the shifter in an intermediate position. You could block the proper gear changes. For example, you might leave the shifter between drive and neutral, which can cause sudden and uncontrolled gear shifts, seriously damaging the transmission, and not just the gearbox suffers. The shifter itself can start showing signs of wear, making gear changes more difficult and imprecise. Over time, this can lead to expensive repairs or even a complete failure of the gear shifter. The solution? Simple, leave the gear shifter alone. The automatic transmission is an extremely precise mechanism designed to shift gears smoothly and efficiently. But if you switch between modes like drive D, reverse R, or park P while the car is moving, you're putting enormous pressure on the internal components. Think of the transmission as a complex gear system that must synchronize perfectly. If you try to shift into park while the car is moving, the locking mechanism could be forced or even break completely. The automatic transmission is an extremely precise mechanism designed to shift gears smoothly and efficiently. But if you switch between modes like drive D, reverse R, or park P while the car is moving, you're putting enormous pressure on the internal components. Think of the transmission as a complex gear system that must synchronize perfectly. If you try to shift into park while the car is moving, the locking mechanism could be forced or even break completely. The automatic transmission works correctly only when you give it time to adapt. If you need to switch from drive to reverse or vice versa, make sure the car is completely stopped before making the change. This way you protect the gearbox and avoid faults that could cost you thousands of euros. The handbrake is not just for emergencies, it's an essential ally when parking. Even if you put the car in park P, that doesn't mean the wheels are completely locked. In fact, all the weight falls on a single mechanism inside the transmission, a small gear called the parking lock. Now imagine parking on a slope without using the handbrake. Everything seems fine until, boom, you feel a jolt when you try to take the car out of park. That's because the gear has been supporting the full weight of your car. And if you do this repeatedly, your transmission will need to visit the mechanic sooner than you think. The handbrake takes over this task and keeps the car stable, reducing the pressure on the transmission. It's like using both hands to carry a heavy weight instead of relying on just one arm. And it doesn't matter if you park on a slope or on flat ground. Cars can move even on flat surfaces, especially if someone bumps them lightly by mistake. And if you rely solely on park, you might hear an expensive crack when you try to drive away again. When driving, each pedal has its clear role. The accelerator pushes the car forward and the brake stops it. But if you press both at the same time, you've just created a serious conflict in your car. The engine tries to accelerate, but the brakes try to stop it. Who wins? No one. Instead, you lose excessive brake wear. Brake pads are designed to work efficiently when you need to slow down or stop, not to fight against the engine constantly. If you press the brake while accelerating, you wear them out unnecessarily, and you'll find yourself changing them more often. Increased fuel consumption, the engine works double time, trying to push the car forward while you're braking at the same time. The result? More fuel burned with no real benefit. Confusion in the electronic systems. Modern cars are equipped with stability and traction systems. If you press the accelerator and brake at the same time, the sensors might not know what to do and either reduce the engine power or apply the brakes unpredictably. Risk of transmission failure. The transmission is forced to handle two opposing commands. Over time, this tension can lead to costly breakdowns. And don't forget, driving with both feet can be dangerous in traffic. If you're used to keeping your foot on the brake while accelerating, you could inadvertently brake or worse, press both pedals accidentally in an emergency, losing control of the car. Your car's engine breathes through an intake system that brings in air to burn fuel. If water enters this system, the engine can swallow water instead of air, and this can cause a hydraulic lock. What happens when the engine drinks water? Water cannot be compressed like air, so when it reaches the cylinders, the engine can suddenly lock up. The result? Severe damage to internal components like the rods and pistons, and repairs can cost half the car's value. Water and electronics don't mix. Modern cars are full of electronic systems, sensors, control units, alternators, batteries. If water reaches these components, short circuits or total breakdowns can occur, leaving the car completely immobilized. Brakes can become ineffective. When water covers the brake discs, it forms a thin layer of water that reduces grip. This phenomenon can make the car brake more slowly and less efficiently, increasing the risk of accidents. If you've driven through water, press the brake lightly a few times to dry them off and regain efficiency. The transmission also suffers. Water and transmission oil don't go well together. If transmission fluid mixes with water, it loses its lubricating properties, which can lead to accelerated wear or even major transmission failure. How deep is too deep? If the water exceeds 15 to 20 centimeters, about half the wheels, the risk increases significantly. Even if the water seems shallow, you don't know what's hiding underneath: a hole, rocks, or other obstacles that could seriously damage your car. The automatic transmission has a mechanism called the shift lock, which ensures the car stays in place when in park. If you turn off the engine before putting the car in park, this mechanism won't activate correctly and the transmission could suffer over time. What happens if you do this? The locking mechanism might not work properly and the car could move slightly. The transmission could be affected because the system tries to stop suddenly without the internal parts being ready. Internal parts, like the clutches or locking gears, can wear out prematurely, leading to expensive repairs in the future. If you try to put it in park after turning off the engine, you might have difficulty shifting the gear lever because the system no longer has the necessary pressure to work properly. In some cases, the lever might get stuck, and you won't be able to shift until you restart the engine. In a busy area, like a parking lot or at a traffic light, this can become a very frustrating situation. How to do it correctly? 1. Put the gear lever in park before turning off the engine. 2. Wait a few seconds for the mechanism to engage. 3. Turn off the engine only after ensuring the car is in park. When your wheels spin in snow or mud, your instinct might make you press the accelerator harder. Mistake. This not only won't help you get out, but it can also cause serious damage to the engine, transmission, and tires. What happens if you force the accelerator? The engine overheats. Sudden acceleration forces the engine to work hard, increasing the risk of premature wear. The transmission suffers. The system tries to distribute power to the wheels, but if they have no grip, the internal components can suffer damage. The tires wear out quickly. Wheels that spin uncontrollably without traction can become too hot, weakening the rubber and significantly reducing tire life. How to do it correctly? Accelerate gently. Instead of flooring the pedal, try controlled acceleration to find the grip point. Use forward-backward movements. If stuck, try rocking gently back and forth to create a little momentum. Use materials to improve traction. Sand, floor mats, or even branches can help the wheel's grip. If you have AWD or FWD, let the system work smartly. Forcing it with sudden accelerations can lead to overload and costly damage. When stuck, the key isn't force, but patience and the correct technique. Modern cars have a fuel pump inside the tank, and it needs fuel not only to power the engine, but also to protect it. How? It cools it. The pump works non-stop and heats up, and the surrounding fuel acts as a natural cooling system. If the tank is nearly empty, the pump becomes partially exposed and starts to overheat. Over time, this leads to wear and potential failures. It lubricates it. Inside the pump are components that move quickly, and the fuel helps them operate smoothly. If the fuel level is too low, the pump will start drawing air instead of fuel, leading to excessive friction and damage. Over time, if you do this often, the pump can fail completely, and replacing it can be costly. Also, in the tank, debris, dirt, and even rust can accumulate. When the fuel is low, the pump may start drawing these impurities, which can clog the injectors. If your car runs on diesel, there's another issue: condensation. Water can accumulate in the tank, and if it reaches the fuel system, it can cause severe damage. How to avoid problems? Never let your tank drop below a quarter of its capacity. If you have an automatic transmission, it's designed to shift gears smoothly and efficiently. But when you do a launch and press the pedal suddenly, you're giving it a serious mechanical shock. The transmission has to make the shifts very quickly and under pressure, which can lead to premature wear of the clutch and torque converter. Over time, This forcing can cause gear slams, which are sudden shifts that make your car feel like it's jerking or shaking when you accelerate. If you've noticed this already, it might be due to an aggressive driving style. A strong start doesn't just affect the engine and transmission. The entire car feels the shock. The tires lose traction, and if you repeat this move often, you risk wearing them out much faster. The suspension has to bear a sudden transfer of weight. The front of the car rises, the back lowers. This constant stress can lead to premature wear of the shock absorbers and joints. So in the long run, every aggressive start shortens the life of your components and empties your wallet faster than you'd like. In automatic cars, the transmission works in the background, shifting gears without you thinking about it. But if you accelerate right when the car wants to change gears, you force the internal components, and the shift can become sudden, irregular, and stressful for the transmission. That's when problems like gear slams, premature wear of the clutch, and torque converter costly breakdowns in the long term. The healthiest way to accelerate is to do it gradually, so the transmission has time to shift without extra stress. If you've made it this far, it means you care about your car, and that's great. This is just the beginning. Stay tuned for more helpful tips to protect your car and drive smarter. So don't forget to follow and turn on notifications to stay updated with the best car tricks. If this video was helpful, leave a like and tell me in the comments what other car tips you'd like to know.